Okay, we're good. So welcome back. Thank you for being here,
Hey, thanks
Mr.
for having me
Murphy.
here.
This is going to be fun. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too.
We'll just start with the first question. Just brief introduction of yourself. Who is David Murphy?
Yeah, so I'm 34. I've got 3 young kids at home, 1, 2, and 4. So pretty busy. When I go home, yeah, it's pretty busy till they crash, and then we crash shortly after. But it's great. I'm in my 3rd year teaching, so kind of just starting out on.
So your first child was born in your last year of your ed degree.
Yes.
Okay, and
Yes.
you did an after degree.
Yes.
So that's a 2-year program.
That's correct. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay. Okay.
So I had done the engineering thing prior and worked in the engineering world for about 10 years, and then went back and did my after degree. And yeah, the timing was like my wife was pregnant with our first son, and he was born right as I was in my practicum. It was crazy, and then yeah, our other 2 have come since. So
You said you were in the engineering world for 10
Yes.
years, like working, or
Yeah.
that's school and work.
no, I worked for about 10 years,
Okay.
8 or 10 years. So yeah, I had done my undergrad degree and then followed it up with kind of a master's, and then worked in government and then private sector before I kind of made the switch into the education world.
Okay.
Yeah.
What made you want to go from? Because you probably didn't want to go bachelor's to master's.
Yes.
Well,
So
let's talk about that for
Yeah.
a moment as well with your background. Like, why did you want to do that?
So I did my undergrad in civil at the U of A because I really like the buildings and bridges and I like the design stuff. And then I went and started applying out to a bunch of like structural engineering firms like the Stantec's and of the world because I wanted to do buildings and bridges and stuff, and was told that if you really want to be in that field, given how
Competitive.
competitive and specific it is, you really need to have your master's.
Okay, so
then I
the
went back to the
engineering to
master's.
master's really
Yes.
is an asset.
Yes, especially when you're depending what direction, like house, depending because engineering covers so much ground, even civil covers so much ground. You could be buildings or bridges or geotechnical or there's all these different fields within civil. But if you really want to specialize, then I was kind of told you pretty much need your master's if you want to be at all competitive.
Interesting.
Yeah, get a
Okay.
job, which I didn't know going into engineering
Okay.
that was going to be a requirement. Really,
So that's interesting. That
Yeah.
kind of helps because I have a friend who I mentioned is a materials engineer. He finished his
Yes.
PhD.
Yeah.
And coming from a humanities perspective, it's like the higher up you go in humanities, the more of a Ponzi scheme it is. Of like,
Yeah.
okay, you're like basically getting a PhD to specify something that's so specific and niche
exactly.
that like the only thing you could really do is hope to be a professor
Yeah.
and teach that to other people
Yeah.
and engage them in the Ponzi scheme.
Right. I know it does
But-
kind of feel that way you get up there because you spend 4 years of your life in engineering and then all of a sudden you're told, oh, you're really going to need 2 more before you can do this.
Yeah.
Though it also kind of makes sense because at the point where you're designing the bridges, because civil covers so much ground that if you want to be the bridges guy, then you've really got to spend a couple years just specializing in that. So it does
Uh-huh.
make sense given how much ground it covers. But then that you're in for 6 years. So
Yeah. Okay, and
Yeah.
so the level up from the degree to the master's is
Yes.
where you specify for how you'd like your work life to look like.
pretty much, yeah. You don't have to. Lots of people can get a career right out of their undergrad. Obviously, not everybody goes back and does their master's, but just for what I wanted to do is really, yeah, that was kind of my choice to specialize. And then it was at that time that I kind of needed a job too, so I ended up finding a part-time job working at the government of Alberta
Yeah.
with Alberta Infrastructure. So they're responsible for all the Alberta government-owned, projects like so schools, hospitals, the museum, those kinds of things that are owned by the government of Alberta. Yeah.
Okay. So if we rewind to 17, 18-year-old David,
Yeah.
what was
I don't know if I want to think about that, David, but
what was pushing you towards engineering? Like why
yeah.
did you want to get into that?
So that's a good question. I think about that sometimes.
Or even like
When I-
even a step before that. Why
Yes.
did 17, 18-year-old David even consider university?
Yeah. I guess I'd always known that I wanted to go to university. It was just kind of, I don't know, bred into us, from like growing up. We were always just kind of under the impression that that's just what comes after high school. So I never
That's
really,
from a family.
yeah,
Okay.
from a family perspective, it was just kind of that's what you do
Yeah.
after high school. So I never really considered not going to university. But the engineering thing, honestly, was probably largely just because I was good at math and science, and not necessarily because I spent a ton of time thinking about what that would look like. Just
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
so many teachers and friends kind of said, "Oh, you're so good at math and science. You're going into engineering." I mean, you hear that enough times, you kind of
Yeah.
start thinking like, "Yeah, I guess so. I don't
Yeah,
know. I don't know
yeah.
what else I'm gonna do." So you submit your application, you get accepted, and boom, now you're in it.
Now you're in it,
It
yeah.
happens so fast. It
You're in
feels
the
like
trenches, really,
yes,
right?
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you don't mind me asking, then maybe
Go.
I'll ask a bit of like family,
ahead.
personal stuff. So, what did your father do then?
So he was more of an entrepreneur.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Did he go to university?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so he did business in university, but he was also kind of, honestly, I think it went back to, like, my grandpa was always sort of the mind that, if you go to university, if there was a world war or something, then at least you're, not necessarily on the front lines, honestly, if you got a degree.
Oh
And
my
then that was
God.
honestly bred into, like, I think it was just kind of ingrained into, like, my dad, and then kind of passed on. And so it was always just, oh, you're going to university,
Just to like for anyone listening, you said World War,
Yeah.
Literally. Okay,
Literally.
Yeah. So
Well,
what-
if you've been
what-
in a world war, you
Yeah,
got
yeah,
that
yeah,
perspective,
yeah,
and then it
definitely,
just
right?
kind of gets passed
Definitely.
down. Yeah.
So when was your grandpa born?
Oh boy, I don't know.
Like he must have fought, or he must have been
Yeah.
alive during,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Okay,
exactly. Yeah, he
okay.
was actually on a submarine
Oh my
Um,
God.
defending. Well, actually, no, sorry. He was on a frigate that would go and sort of like protect, like ships that were transporting goods back and forth to Europe.
In
and
World War
then-
II.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah, because the Germans were sinking boats.
Yes.
Right.
and his frigate got actually shot down by, or like torpedoed by a submarine, and ended up sinking. And then they got rescued. Some guys didn't off that ship, but he got rescued and then kind of got sent back. And he was 18 at the time, so
So your grandpa was literally floating in the ocean, waiting to be rescued.
yeah, you should see the pictures. It's wild. So you can
Oh
kind
my
of get
God.
you coming in with a pretty different perspective of, if you're not right on the front.
And so, as far as you're aware, your grandpa was on that boat because he wasn't educated, or because he was?
No, he so he did. I think at the time, he was one of two brothers, and his brother stayed home to farm. And I think the expectation was kind of just that, you can go and help and serve, and so that was kind of the direction he went. But I think he saw in his kind of journey that, what, if you do have a little bit of that extra education, then it just puts you on a little different path if something like
Yeah.
that were ever to happen again. So
Wow.
Yeah.
So David Murphy's decision to go to university is 2 generations prior from being attacked on a boat floating in the ocean.
yeah, I've never actually thought about that, but there is probably a really strong connection, stronger than I thought about, to tell you
Well,
the truth.
And that's so important because, like, for me as an immigrant,
Yes.
like, my parents were like, hell no, you're not working. Like,
Yeah.
you're not going to have a job in high school. You're not playing sports. You're going to go get an education. You're going
Right.
to go to university. You're going to get a job.
Yes.
Like, you're going to be, wealthy. You're going to be
Yeah.
made off, right? And it's like, well, I go back to my grandparents. Well, my family's very religious. And so they did a lot of volunteer work. And, like, towards the end of his life, my grandpa was basically a groundskeeper for the founders, like, for the head of the religious community, right?
Oh,
so it's like,
interesting.
it's like I basically come from a family of people who aren't educated in the literal sense, but
Yeah.
like very practical hands-on. Like my
Yes.
dad as well. Like he's not educated, but he could build a house.
Right.
He's not a civil engineer. He's
Yeah.
not an architect. He's
So
not
he's
an
educated,
electrician,
just
right?
more.
It's like,
yeah.
he learned how to weld. He learned how to like build houses. He learned electrical work. He learned how to work on cars just because it's
Right.
like, well, I have a problem and it's too expensive to get someone else to
Exactly.
fix it. Right. But coming from that, then it's like, okay, like I come here, my family comes here in 98. I'm 2 years old. My parents are like, well, we don't want you to work.
Right.
Right. We've worked. And that's not necessarily a conversation we've had.
Yeah.
But it's like it's easy for me to put those pieces together when I
Right.
look back. I'm like, oh, clearly they don't want me to struggle the way they did.
Right.
And because like with our grandparents, our parents' generation, it's like, well, if you go to school, you get a job,
Yes.
and your life is better, right?
Yeah.
Whereas like maybe now that's not so much the case, right? For
Yes.
the kids in our classrooms right now,
Absolutely.
it's like going to school doesn't necessarily mean your life is better. In fact, it might make it worse. Right?
Absolutely. Exactly. And there's so many other paths you can kind of take now. But it's like you say, when I think back to 17, 18-year-old David and kind of the decisions got made, it's like I didn't really give it maybe the thought that I should have,
But which 18-year-old does?
Yeah, and that's it.
Right?
Yeah.
Like,
at
I
the
didn't
time,
really give it a thought.
kind of just on this path, and you just carry on and off you go.
Like, I ended up a teacher by such, like, luck and chance. Like, I had one conversation that lasted 2 minutes with a guy who was my basketball coach and phys ed teacher and kind of a
Yes.
friend and mentor. And, typical guy fashion, we're sitting in the gym. We're not even looking at each other. He asked me, he's like, so have you applied for university? This
Yeah.
is 1 week before the deadlines. I said, no.
This is in your grade 12.
Yeah, grade 12, 1 week before the deadline.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no. He's like, why not? He's like, I don't know what I want to do. And, he's like, I don't know, he's eating like a grapefruit. He's chewing without breaking stride. He says, it's not that bad of a job. And I look
Interesting.
over at him and I say, you know what, you got a point. And that day I went home, I applied for education.
Is that right?
That's the story. That's the
Wow.
honest truth. And, when you don't give it a lot of thought, like, as engineering, your whole schedule is made for you.
Yeah.
Pretty much, right?
Pretty
Like, you don't
much.
get a lot of choice, especially after the second year, I imagine.
Yes.
And you're probably with a lot of the same people.
Yes.
Okay.
The whole thing.
So with the humanities, particularly the social studies teachers, it's like they basically, like your grandpa, like you're like
Yes.
in the ocean. It's like, hey, there's like 150 courses you could do
Yeah.
to fill like these 10 credits,
Right.
right? So you need like,
Take
I don't
your
know,
pick.
you need 5 classes to fill 10 credits, but there's
Yeah.
150 options, right?
Right.
And it's like, okay, go,
Take your
go,
pick. You
go,
can do a lot of
little
directions.
duckling.
Yeah.
Go
It's kind
fly,
of daunting.
right? It's very
Yeah.
daunting. Like I didn't even understand. Like I had to go to the counselor before the semester started,
Yeah.
and part of it was because like my document didn't download properly. So I'm like,
Okay.
well, like how do I even fill these credits?
Yeah.
And then she showed me. She's like, oh, like okay, well let me resend this to you. Downloads properly, and then it shows you all the courses. But very daunting. And it's like when you don't really think through what you want. For me, my first 2 years, I was like deeply depressed. Like
Wow.
there was no like my first year was whatever because it's university.
Yeah.
Now I will say, like on the day of my orientation, I opened the door in my van. Before I put my foot on the ground, I had already looked around and I told myself I don't belong here. Right?
Really?
This is not my environment, right? Like these people are very studious, they're very
Oh,
like
Just from the
student
look at
types,
things.
and I'm like, oh, that's not me.
Right.
It's like, but I'm here, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm in the belly of the whale, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's the hero's journey, right? It's like, I can't go back. I'm
Yeah.
already registered. My student loan has come in. But yeah,
Here we
like,
go.
when we're not aware of why we're doing those things, it's like, it
No.
puts you, like, in the psychological, metaphorical desert. It's like,
Yes.
you're just wandering now. And
It's
there's
true.
no path, right? And, if you're to, like, med school or engineering, certain
Yeah.
programs will give you a path.
Exactly.
But it's like you're being dragged along if you didn't choose it, right?
Yes. And I was
Did-
going to say, it's not always a good thing having that path because right out of high school, then you're into engineering.
Yeah.
Because it is so prescribed, it's pretty easy to just kind of put your head down and do the work. And you just, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6, whatever. And you never really have to choose those courses or really give any really critical thought to, wow, like what else is kind of out there?
Yeah.
Not that I didn't enjoy it, because I did. And, you do think about it as you're going, but it makes it pretty easy to just kind of have blinders on.
Yeah,
For sure.
absolutely. Right? And so you said your dad was an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So why did he want you to go into school and not be like, hey, like, like David, there's a lot of money
Yeah.
to be made in business. Like,
For
here
sure.
are the tools, right?
Yeah, and you know what? I still have a bit of that kind of entrepreneurial. I mean, you grow up surrounded by it your whole life. I think it's kind of hard not to. I think it's kind of like one of those things where
There's probably
maybe
a
in
bit
your
of
blood a little bit,
temperament
'cause
and
for
genetic
sure.
stuff in there of like just like whatever traits your dad had
Yes.
passed on to you.
I
as
think
well.
so.
And then you grew up in that environment. that
Yes,
fostered
and
it.
you see it all the
Yeah.
time. I know I'm a little more risk averse. Like I don't think I have the
Okay.
risk tolerance to be able to necessarily, with a young family and like have a business where you're really dependent on,
Yeah.
making that
Yeah.
work. I don't know. I'm a little bit more risk averse, but at the same time, I don't know. There is a lot to be said. But even still, and he's done really well. as a business owner, but I think still he always saw it as, you know what, go to university, go get a degree, and then you want to go start up your own business, great, but like you've kind of same thing, you've still got that education that you can always not fall back on, but it's great experience, and then you've kind of got it, and now go decide what you're going to do. It was kind of like, you know, a lot of people would see graduation of grade 12 kind of as that point, and for us it just happened to be after university, where now go decide kind of what's next.
And I want to say by the time I left university, it started changing.
Yeah.
Like, because I graduated now in 2019, and I think it's just going downhill.
Yeah.
But I would say, like, when you were in university, there was probably a huge maturing process that existed
For sure.
in that time period of, like,
Yes.
oh, like, I got to be on top of my own assignments.
Yes.
Like, I got to be responsible, accountable,
For sure.
and, like, I got to make sure I'm getting this done. And it's hard because,
Yes.
like, you know, you come to regular school, and it's like you're with the general population. You go to university, you are with the top 15%.
Yeah.
So your little, like, 45-minute effort to get to 90% of high school
Yeah.
puts you at the bottom,
Yes.
right? Because there's that, like, 5 to 50 kids in your class who are, like,
Definitely.
literally, if I don't do, like, my family's honor depends upon me getting this 4.0
Really,
and
though?
succeeding. Yeah,
Yes.
it's
true.
right. We can laugh. It's
Yeah.
funny, but, like, it's true.
It's true.
Right?
It is true.
You're competing with some people who literally have no other option and
Yeah.
are desperate to succeed. Like, and that's a small percentage.
Yeah.
But then there's a percentage of people. So, like, my friend who did the PhD, he was telling me the other day, or like a week or two ago, he's like, "Oh, Najib, like, I never went to classes. Like, I could never
No.
understand my professors, so I just did it all by myself." Like, that guy is
And obviously
insanely
not.
intelligent,
Right.
right? Like, to be able to do that in the math, science, engineering realm,
Yes.
medicine, you have to be, like, ridiculously
Yeah.
smart. You know, to the point where, like, and he didn't want to do engineering. He was more of a musician. It's like, man, if he wanted to do that and put his effort in, he would have been like the top 5% student.
Right.
And it's like, you have to compete with those people, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, it's not like it's just a walk in the park going to university either.
No.
And especially, like, you know, maybe 5, 10, 15 years ago, because it's like,
Yeah.
it could really change your life for the better, a good university experience.
For sure.
Um,
And I did enjoy it. Yeah. Because
Yeah.
you know what? Like it was challenging. Like high school, I've always had to kind of work pretty hard, you know, for my marks. Like I'm not one of the people that it just comes really easy and you can skip class or whatever. And I've always kind of had to work for it. But university I found challenging. Yeah, because you are with these people that, you know, they're kind of like-minded, but a lot of them were a lot harder working than me, and you're trying to kind of keep up. And
Right.
and then it was a bit of a shock. I mean, you get into university after, you know, you can put in a reasonable amount of effort and do really well in high school, and then you absolutely get crushed by some of these courses where you get a 50, you barely pass a course, and you know, realizing that that's not tied to your self-worth, that was a bit of a shock for me. You know,
Yeah.
when you're used to getting like 80s and 90s, and then all of a sudden you're barely
Oh, I
passing
can-
some of these courses, and you got to realize, you know what, that's okay. What are you going to do about it?
Or like,
Yeah, that
you
was a
know,
challenge.
every now and then you hear the horror story of, like, the class average was like a 35%, so
Right.
50 is a top end,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And, like, we don't need to discuss the nonsense behind that, but yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I guess one more question just on the background.
Yeah.
And just more of the personal.
Yeah.
So you have a child that's 4 years old.
Yeah.
You're 32. When did you get married? Like, how old were you when you got married?
26.
Wow.
Yeah. You know, it's
Wow.
funny. I was talking to my wife the other day, whereas when we got married, we felt like we didn't feel young. We
Yeah.
kind of felt like we'd been together for 3 or 4 years, and, you know, it was kind of the next step, and we were ready for that. But we didn't feel young. Looking back now, I feel like 26 seems so young. It's funny how it's all just relative, but
So you two would have met. Like, did you two meet in university?
do you know what? We actually went to the same high school and kind of had some mutual friends, and it wasn't until later in university
Okay.
that we ended up getting together. But
Okay.
we sort of knew of each other years prior,
Yeah.
but we're never really close.
Okay.
until,
And
yeah,
so for you
university.
at 26, like, you just finished your master's probably.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
I was
Okay.
just
So,
my
so you've
master's,
done like a
exactly.
very intensive 6-year academic
Yeah.
program. And then how about her? Like, is she
She's a teacher as well.
Okay.
So she did it. She got her degree right out of high school, and she teaches elementary.
okay?
And she's been off now, but so that's kind of a nice perk too.
And you're
having
the
both
same
be
age.
teachers. Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
both
at
same age.
26 then, if she went 18, 22 she graduates. At 26 she's been teaching for 4 years.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So-
more than that. She'd been to Australia and taught there, and then come back, and she had her permanent teaching, and Yeah, so I could
Yeah.
bounce a lot of questions off her when it came to like thinking about going into education.
Okay,
Which
so
was
like
nice.
for the two of you at 26, it's like very different to like maybe the standard 26-year-old,
Yeah,
right?
probably.
It's like you've gone through this process. Like for you, the academic of like, okay, I gotta like rigorously do my work
Yes.
because like most people don't know, like a master's program is almost entirely just like the PhD, self-driven,
Yes.
right? So you've had to do that now for 2-3 years. You've
Yes.
successfully completed it.
Yeah.
Whereas your wife has spent like several years now, like managing a class,
Exactly.
which is a maturing process. I'll tell you
Yes.
that, right?
Yes, for sure. Especially when you're right out of university and now you got your own classroom. I know that's a lot. You learn a lot there pretty quickly.
Definitely, right? Like, I don't
Yeah.
need to get into my own stuff on that, but cool. Okay.
Yeah.
And then last question on that is,
Yeah.
so what? And I'm a big fan of it, but like, what made you two want to have a family and like with 3 kids? Like, do you plan on having more or?
That's a good question. Jury's out.
Yeah.
But you know what? 3 feels pretty good for us right now. Like,
Okay.
we're about, I think, as busy
And
as...
there's 3 young ones.
Yeah, and they're also young that, you know what, you're kind of in this haze where, you know, they're up throughout the night, so you're not really sleeping and kind of hard to picture having more. But I came from a big family. I'm one of 5, and she's got 2 other siblings. So we both kind of came from that family dynamic, and so we've always known I kind of wanted a little bit bigger family.
Okay.
So we're just taking it one day at a
So
time
you
for
come
right
from
now.
families and you want.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Interesting.
Mhm.
And 1 of 5. Which one are you?
So I'm second oldest.
Okay.
So
okay,
like
okay.
there's 4, I'm one of 4 brothers, and then my sister's the youngest.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
So yeah, always
Yeah.
kind of had lots of people around. You know, we always grew up. My siblings and I grew
Yeah.
up really close, and so I kind of wanted that for my kids too.
I don't
You grow
have-
up
Okay.
getting to know your, you know, where your siblings are kind of your friends. Like that
Yeah.
was always us.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were.
I
Very
don't
lucky.
have the book here, but I just recently bought a book called The Birth Order book.
Oh, I've never read it.
I haven't read it yet either, but it talks about the interesting dynamics
Does it?
there. Yeah.
There's a ton of interesting
Yeah.
dynamics that I think come with. We joke about it all the time, like the middle brother thing or the older ones. Yeah, there's a lot there. I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Because like I'm 1 of 4.
Okay.
I'm the
So, yeah.
youngest, but there's 5 years and 3 days between me and the second youngest, like
Okay.
my brother.
Yeah.
And according to this book, like it kind of resets at the 5-year mark. So
Interesting.
it's like I'm kind of right in that first, second
Yes.
technical order.
Oh,
but
that's
fourth,
interesting.
Like last in the biological order. But
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we could just move into the next question. We've already touched on that, but I guess what was your education experience like? We could talk a little bit about before and after. So you've already mentioned you enjoyed it,
Yeah.
like
I
after high
I
school.
really did. Yeah, I really
Uh-huh.
had a positive university experience.
Yeah.
You know, like high school was, it had its challenges. It wasn't always my favorite, but I had a good friend group, which made a huge difference.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I enjoyed high school, and then going to university again, where you kind of like find your people and they have a lot of similar interests. So I had a really positive university experience. I liked the challenge. I liked the, you know, being on campus, and I don't know. I
It is
had
a good
fun.
vibe. You were at the
Yeah.
U of A, right?
Yeah.
Through and through?
Yeah.
Okay,
For
okay.
everything.
Okay. Yeah, the
Yeah.
U of A can be really nice.
Yeah.
It can also be very dreary.
Yes. You know, and it is exactly, and it can be kind of a little. It is daunting, and you're in some of these classes that are huge. You know, a couple hundred students in these classes.
Yeah.
But yeah, for me, it was actually a really positive experience, and like I say, it was. You do a lot of growing up in those 3 or 4 years, and kind of figuring
Right.
out who you are.
Right? Because it's like, well, first, I guess before I ask that question, which high school did you go to?
So I went to Louis Saint Laurent. It's right next to Harry Ainley, kind of on the
Okay,
south side.
okay.
Yeah, it was
It's
a
such
little bit
large
smaller.
school.
Yeah, it is like bigger than, you know,
Like
I guess
800
within-
kids?
boy, I can't even remember. Probably
Okay.
somewhere in there. You know, it's not one of those massive like Harry Ainley or kind of Skonas, but is bigger.
Okay. So I went to McNally and there's 1,000 kids,
Oh,
right?
yeah,
But like I was gonna say, so you know, especially when you go into those STEM fields
yes,
and you're sitting in there with a class of 500,
Yeah.
like it's sink or swim,
totally.
right? Like and like you have to know whether or not you're made of
Yeah,
the right stuff to succeed, right?
Yes. Yeah,
'Cause-
that was my experience for sure.
Right. Interesting. And so you had mentioned as well that like school didn't come easy to you. Why do you think that is? Like
I don't know. I had pretty high expectations, maybe That's probably a big part of it. Is
Yeah.
it has a lot to do with how
Yeah.
well you expect yourself to do. So if you have these really high
Both
expectations,
at high
then-
school and university?
yeah,
Okay.
probably higher. And looking back, higher than they needed to be. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you're always, in university, honestly, you kind of get your degree. Nobody's looking at what your GPA was.
Yeah.
If you got the degree, you kind of got the degree. And so I put a lot of pressure on myself to get those really high marks. And looking back, hindsight 2020, I'd probably tell myself you didn't really need to do that. But, at the time, it just was.
But,
Always what I
that,
did,
that
I
goes
don't know.
into something else we had discussed. Like, we're told that the grades matter,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Like, and to an extent, they matter in high school.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't get above a 75%, you're not reasonably going to do well at
Yeah.
the 20 and 30 level, like
Right.
the next level up, right?
Right.
And so, part of it is like that kind of brainwashing of like, oh, your
Yeah.
grades matter. It's like, no, they don't, right?
Yeah.
As long as you're passing, right? Honestly, as long as you're passing and you're understanding enough of the material,
Yes.
right? Or in the engineering, like, okay, if you understand the practical aspect of it,
Yeah.
but maybe not so much the theoretical, the spatial, like in your mind understanding.
Yes.
That's not really my world, so
Yeah.
right?
No, but it's true.
Because with the history stuff, it's like for myself, like the social studies, recognizing like, okay, like 50 questions on the test, 25 were memory and recall. That's not my
Right.
skill set. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not good at remembering things.
Right.
But if you ask
neither.
me to narrate you some details, particular, I could tell you easily, right?
Right.
And so having that understanding that as long as you're passing and you're doing well enough, because you don't want to be like a 2.0 GPA,
No, that's
but
right.
like if you're at a 4.0, do you have a life?
And
like-
that's the thing, right? Is what are you giving up to have a 4.0?
Yeah.
No, it's not that you can't do it. I think,
You know,
anybody could do it. But you are making sacrifices in order to do that. And then at the end of the day, if you have a 4.0 or a 3.0 or a 3.5 or whatever it is,
Yeah.
is that really going to make a difference in terms of the jobs you can get and the path you want to take? And I would argue probably not a lot. Some maybe there are, but for the most part, I would argue probably not as
Well,
big an impact as I felt like
the
it
biggest impact would be if you want to keep moving up.
That's right.
Right? So
Yeah,
like if
exactly.
you want to get a PhD, you got to
Exactly.
be the
You have to.
4.0, right?
for sure.
And that's where it comes down to that. Like, how important is that PhD in your field? And like, it seems like for the STEM fields,
Yeah.
it is kind of necessary.
Some
to,
of
like,
them, yeah.
certain situations, right? Which kind of comes down to and Jack Ma talks about this. I don't know if you know who that is.
Yeah, I'm familiar with them.
And he says like, okay, make sure your grades are good enough that you're passing and doing well. Like,
Yeah.
you don't want to be at the bottom of the pack,
Yes.
but make sure they're low enough that you can do other things. It's like,
Yes.
can you take an internship somewhere else? Can
That's
you like
interesting.
volunteer somewhere? Can you build a social network in a community?
Yeah.
Right? Can you actually get contacts somewhere? Right? And this is coming from a guy in communist China, like, a place where like literally if you don't know the right people, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter if you have a 4.0.
Yeah.
That's at least my understanding of
Yeah.
that situation, right? Whereas here, like a relatively unknown person can make a name for themselves.
Sure.
And they can move up. They could start their own business, get their own idea. You could put your name out there, right?
Yes. Though there's
I
a lot
would-
to be said for knowing people too and getting yourself out there and
Right? And, to an extent, like, that's kind of my experience of, like, entering into a field where I didn't know any contacts.
yes.
And so, yeah, I've had my trouble with Edmonton Public. And then, how I got to Star was from a friend through jiu-jitsu, right?
Oh
But,
wow.
like, that's
Yes,
the thing.
that's
I
how it goes,
I started doing jiu-jitsu when I was in university through the U of A.
Yeah.
And it's like 2 years later, that got me a job, right?
See, that's funny.
3
how it
years
happens.
later, 4 years later, like I have a contract and I'm getting
Right.
all this experience, right? And it's like, okay, if I was very hungry to get my 4.0, I don't know, to make my parents proud, to like bring honor onto my family,
Yeah.
to match whatever weird mentality I have in my head, it's like, well,
Yes.
then I wouldn't have done jiu-jitsu. I would have been
Right.
more miserable than I was.
Right.
And where would it have gotten me? It would have
Right.
gotten me a degree with no contacts.
Right.
Right.
And no job prospects.
Right. So
Yeah.
like realistically, and I guess we should state like anyone student watching this. So like universities go from a 0 to a 4.0 grade
Yeah.
rating, and 4.0 is like 95% plus.
Yeah.
Right. Which is very difficult to do.
Yeah. It is very difficult to
Especially in
do.
the STEM.
Yeah.
Right. But like if you're sitting at like a 2.7 to a 3.3, like that's honestly such a good grade,
Yeah. It is.
and it gives you the time to like have a social life,
Yes.
potentially have a job. to have a relationship,
Yes.
to do some volunteer, whatever, have
Exactly.
a life, right? Which
Yes.
is so necessary for university.
Especially in those years, absolutely. Exactly. And that's a big part of university that, again, I had a great group of friends but probably could have done more of the social stuff too if I hadn't put so much pressure kind of on myself. So I think, looking back, it's kind of easy to see, but that would definitely be a, piece of advice.
I guess on that note, did you do any kind of extracurriculars related to civil engineering? Like, are there any contests and stuff? Because I know, like, if you're an AI and robotics stuff, you could potentially do that on the side. Like, hey,
Sure.
me and my buddies, we competed on a robotics team. We made
Yes.
this thing. We won a competition.
Yeah,
Which I imagine looks really good in that field on a resume,
sure.
right? You have practical, like, hey, we actually did this.
Yes.
Did you do anything like that?
No. Do you know what? I didn't really look a ton. I mean, like, in terms of, I tried to kind of get jobs that would give me the experience. Like, I did a lot of, construction, laboring positions for a few years throughout university. Not just for the money, but because, you got to do something, but because it kind of, you learn so much about building construction when you're guys sweeping the floor and you're watching everybody doing their thing, all the trades coming in and out. And if that's the world you want to be in, is kind of that construction world, then I don't know. I kind of always felt like it's a good opportunity to kind of pay your dues and learn. And then I applied a lot of that later on. So I never really did a lot of the competition stuff, but definitely, I always
you went down to the, because one of the ways I explain this stuff is like, okay, so like, up here is the abstract, and that's the university classroom. That's the master's, the PhD, very abstract.
Yeah.
The construction worker is the physical, tangible
Exactly.
realm, right? Like, actually, when the convoy protest was going on, I was explaining these things
Yes.
in that way, right? It's like, here's a very physical, tangible way that this science works,
Yes.
right? Like, sure, you're in your classroom and you're doing bridge building, you're specializing in that. Watching that new bridge being built, just going there, because I walk by there, like, you could totally just put a little chair on the beach side there and just watch what they're doing. Maybe walk up to them, ask them a question, right?
Yes.
Like, as long as they're friendly, you're not drunk and not, like, belligerent, right? But, like, better yet, if you're on the job site getting paid, maybe it is getting paid to sweep a broom. But then you tell me, oh, I'm a civil engineer student.
Yes.
I was going to say that. One day.
Exactly. Because all the engineers and the architects that you're working towards, they walk through there all the time. And you can bet that they're watching and then, exactly, strike up a conversation. And it's really interesting the way it goes. It's like you're, getting your jiu-jitsu contact that ends up kind of introducing you here. It's people, I really found that was one thing. I was fortunate because I had a few contacts kind of in that world that introduced me to a few sort of people who became mentors for me and who I could kind of ask about, hey, like, what does it look like, this role you're in that I'm trying to work towards? But, even if you don't have those contacts, there's so many ways that you can kind of get your foot in the door and just go start introducing yourself, because people are so open, I find, to sharing what they do. People want to,
especially if what they do is kind of abstract.
Yeah.
Right?
Definitely. People like talking about it. They spent a long time building their careers and stuff. And so I find people are almost always pretty open to answering questions and letting you kind of see what that's all about if you ask.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I won't sit here and like I will add that, you will find people who are not that way.
Absolutely.
But the reality is like, okay, you can't have a brittle spirit. Like, if somebody says no, blows you off, you got to understand these people are also very busy.
Exactly.
And they're very like, time is money.
Yes.
There's a lot of responsibility on their shoulder. But the reality is, it's like, hey, if you're by that job site, you just ask a question like, hey, where are you walking to? Can I ask you a couple questions while you go there?
Exactly.
Right? It's like, it's one of those, like, because I don't know how aware of this you are on the internet, but like, particularly the very younger generations are like, actually, I'll make a side point. Do you know who Gary Vee is?
Yeah, love
him.
Right? Yeah, yeah,
so like him. Gary Vee's hustle culture, like,
it's great.
Like, if there's a way, you need to find it. You
Yeah.
need to go out there and figure it out, right?
Yes.
And it's like, the reality is like, okay, if you're a civil engineering student, you're like an education student. Education can be hard, right?
Yeah,
we can talk about that, but like, the reality is like I'll go on camera and admit I had 2 students teaching my literacy class for the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But one of them is legitimately considering being a teacher.
Right.
And this is a wonderful opportunity for her to figure it out.
Right.
Right? And like she's young, right? She's 17.
Yep.
Trying to get a hold of grade 9. Like for me, it's easy, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I'll wrestle them, right? Like
Yeah.
Steve Irwin style, right? But for her to like actually see on the side of like, okay, like she had to make a couple projects and assignments and recognize like, hey, yeah, half the time we make this stuff up on the spot.
Yeah.
Or the night before.
What a great experience.
Right? Recognizing like, okay, there's that kid that's being annoying. Well, you can't really do anything. You have to deal with it. You have to grow as a person to deal with that, right?
Before you can go back
to
your
and same
your
thing. It's
presentation.
like, okay, like my first job out of university was working roads.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Parks and roads, they had combined it
Yes.
that year. And I was basically filling potholes. I was building roads, right? Through that, I learned a little bit about the bridges stuff, right? Because I talked to people here and there.
Yeah.
I learned how a road is made, how it's fixed, right? All this cool stuff. And it's like the reality is if you want that information, and me and my friend always discuss this, like go find the lowest entry point that pays you to learn.
Yes.
Rather
I
than
agree.
paying 10 grand a year to learn.
Yeah.
Go work on a job site.
Yeah.
Right? And the point I was going to make about the younger generation is like, it's like the reality is like there is a ladder.
Yeah.
And you can't skip steps.
No,
right?
it's
Because
pretty
this
hard.
ladder is not physical, right?
Yeah.
And part of the process is you have the humility to work your schedule around other people's.
Yeah.
Okay, that guy's busy because he's the man, right? Or she's
Right.
the man, right?
Yeah.
Or she's the woman, whatever.
Yes, exactly.
They're the top dog. They're running this operation. They're very busy. You have to understand that right away. But if you also keep in mind that people are gracious,
Yes.
and they're willing to like educate, if they see like you're hungry, like you
Yeah.
want to know, like, hey, I have all these questions. Like, how do you do this, this, and this? Like,
Yes.
how does this function? How does that function?
Exactly.
Right? Like, they will eventually. You will grow on them
Yeah.
if they're someone who's interested in sharing. If
I
they're
do
not
think so,
like
too.
Whatever, find someone else.
That's
But
right.
there's like
Go
a
find
million of
someone
those
else.
people, right?
There are.
But being able to have that little bit of experience where, like, you work a labor job, like, okay, so you're like, for myself, it's like one day I envision like maybe I'll be a carpenter,
Okay.
right? So it's like working on a labor crew, just I don't know, putting up drywall,
Yeah.
right? Sure, that's not carpentry, but it's like I'm sure a carpenter will come by
Oh, yeah.
or go down to some place where they make handmade furniture.
Exactly.
Buy some stuff from the guy first of all, or girl,
Yeah.
and then like talk to them,
Have a
ask them
conversation.
questions, right?
Exactly.
Same with like I do this with, or my friend does this more so. Maybe one day I'll do that as well. But like trying to find local meat and eggs and dairy,
Yes.
right? And like learning more about the farming practice. But
Yep.
like, one thing that people kind of miss and maybe isn't being taught because part of an issue I have with education. It's like a lot of people go from high school to university to the classroom.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of real experience, but it's like when you go out into the world and see that like there's so much to be learned
Yeah.
and gained and to be paid
Yes.
while you're doing it, right? Like in one of my videos, like me and my friend were discussing how like, okay, you want to be a mechanic? Why don't you go to a mechanic shop and say, hey buddy, like I'll volunteer here for a week.
Exactly.
I'll
That's
sweep
what I was
floors,
going to say.
I'll clean stuff. Can I just watch and shadow? Because I don't
Yeah.
really know what this job is
Yeah.
about. And I'd like to know. You don't have to pay me. If you don't
Yeah.
like me, you can tell me to screw off.
Right.
Right? Like there's no contract here. There's no negotiation.
Right.
I'll just show up here, 9 a.m. I'll leave at 3.
Yeah.
You're not
And
paying
if you
me,
show
right?
up at 9 a.m. and you stay till 3
Yeah.
and you're hard working in the meantime.
And the
There's
thing is,
time to learn.
you really have to come into it with the spirit of like, yeah, I'm not going to get anything out of it. I'm not getting money out of this, right?
Yeah.
And maybe I'm not going to get a job.
Yeah.
Because that comes back to that vision like we were talking about. Like you have to know why you're there. And it's like if you want to be a mechanic,
Yes.
maybe get some knowledge before you go into NATE
Yeah.
and start getting your different colored
Yeah.
seals, right?
Or at the same time. Like you don't have
Yeah.
to lock yourself. You don't have to just be doing schooling. You can go and volunteer on the weekend for a couple hours and that's exactly.
Work in Mr.
I think
Luke,
that's
change
great.
oil, right?
Exactly. And go see what they do.
Or sweep, right?
Yes.
Man, like those shops are dirty.
Yeah.
I'm sure they could use a guy
Absolutely.
sweeping and organizing things. And like the thing is, like it's so many of these jobs and positions, they're like they're just dying for competent people
Yeah.
who can lead.
Right.
Like I was having conversations with students about this. Like all this stuff you guys want, it just needs leadership.
Yeah.
It needs someone who's willing to, and let's be honest, sacrifice their own life
Yeah.
towards this goal,
Right.
this objective, and to lead. But it's like, hey kid, that could be you. Like you could make that change,
Yeah.
and you could reap the reward of that, right?
I think you're right. And if you get in that world and you start volunteering, who knows what comes out of that too? Because now you're in the right spot, and then, you know what, when the right time comes along, and I don't know, I think you'd be surprised at the number of opportunities that kind of come out of that. Not necessarily even in the form of a job, but, you know, a recommendation or a referral somewhere else, or who knows what comes out of that. But if you're not putting yourself in those situations where you open it up, then you know you're not gonna.
You know what? So like when I started teaching, I started as a sub, and so I had about 80 days before I was really like in contract.
Yes.
And I don't know what they kind of said about me as a sub, but I knew it's like, okay, if you give me sub plans,
Yeah.
I will follow it to a T. So give me all the details you want. Tell me exactly what you want done. I will do it to a T, and we'll get as far as I can manage.
Right.
Many of those days, we did everything. Right? Went through all the sub plans. Everything was taught. Didn't matter what the subject was.
Yeah.
I'd tell teachers, like, hey, I'm not a science math guy. Like, I'll try.
Yep.
Just know that, like, you might have to come in and adjust some errors,
Sure.
right? But
That's
if
reasonable.
you give me detailed layout of, like, do the problem this way and then have them do it, I can probably learn on the moment. Because I did that for Dean. It was
really?
so funny. Yeah, I subbed one of his math classes. And it was literally like I'd be on the board doing something like, we following along. Does this look right? I think you got to do this. And like, you know, this was like a low-end math class, so I couldn't really keep up. But like slowly as I'm watching, like, oh, like on this example, he did this. And on that example, he did this. Oh, I see what I need to do.
Right.
I'm learning and I'm doing it. But the thing is, it came back down to like every time I had a sub day, it was like, yeah, what did you get through? Everything.
Right.
And that reputation just built. And it's like, okay, we want this guy back in.
I bet that carries the
right?
rest.
And then the other thing was like I would take that extra responsibility. So like at the school I was subbing down in Wetaskiwin, particularly the year I was subbing, they had this horrible grade 8 class.
Mm-hmm.
And like, you know, it came down to a point where like I had subbed for a teacher for a couple days. And for whatever reason, they needed someone else to come in for a couple more days.
Yeah.
And I was already booked it for a different teacher for the next week. I just went to the office. I was like, hey, you know, I don't know who this young lady is who's coming in for this grade 8 class, but I know you struggle to get subs. So why don't her and I just switch, and I'll keep dealing with these grade 8s because I know what to do, what the issue is. But that way, like, maybe this person doesn't get a horrible experience.
Not scaring off of it. Yeah,
so I ran that by them, and I said, the caveat is, like, maybe those kids respond better to her, so I'll let you make the final choice, but I want you to know that I'm willing to do that. They sighed with relief. They're like, we were going to come to you and ask you, but we were like, hey, maybe we should give him a break. He's been with this class for 5 days.
Right.
And I was like, no, like, you know, I like wrestling in the mud too,
that's
right?
Awesome. So, yeah, but that's awesome. Take a little initiative and...
You know, and how that story links to this is that the vice principal at the school at the time was Dean's sister.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
and so at one point Dean asked her, like, hey, do you know any good subs? She's like, well, we know one, but we don't really want to tell you.
Oh,
but
really?
Because I'm nice to you, like, here, this is his name. And then I started getting to this school. So, like, I think the first person I subbed for at this school was Natasha Dorman Watson.
Yes.
Right? And came in a couple of days, came in for Dean. And, you know, again, people see, like, okay, we let this guy alone.
Yeah.
He did his job well. All the notes got covered. Let's bring him back.
Exactly.
Right? And then, you know, unfortunately, the day of that tragedy occurred, like, Dean called me that day. Right? And it was basically like, okay, like, we know, like, we have a solid, reliable guy.
Yeah.
Just by chance, it was in a social studies classroom. It's like, okay, he called me that day. Now, I was filling in for someone for COVID. But, you know, that's just my experience with that. Of like, if you're willing to actually do the work, take the responsibility, put yourself out there. The thing is, people need to understand, like, I was driving an hour each way to go to Wetaskiwin. And I told them, absolutely, like, you're putting money in my bank.
Yeah.
And you're giving me experience and days on the job. I will come here anytime. Right. And they fully embraced me. Like, teachers there would pull me aside. They'd be like, hey, this is, like, how you deal with these situations. Or they'd be more than willing to, like, spend 20, 30 minutes talking to me. Like, hey, like, how do you deal with this? You know, they'd be giving me career advice and whatnot, telling me all these different, like, aspects of the career, giving me personal insights. It's like, I learned so much in that time of subbing.
Right.
Where, you know, like, again, if you just want to be half on the gas pedal and coast through it, like, sure, go ahead. It's your life. But, you know, like, if you're just a little bit more ambitious than the average person, like nowadays, especially for this young generation, it's like you can go so far.
Oh, yeah. You set yourself apart. You drive to Wetaskiwin. If you're the guy or girl willing to drive to Wetaskiwin, to do that job when a lot of people would probably say, you know what, it's an hour drive, forget it, I'm not interested. Then that sets you apart.
And like an opportunity didn't arise there for long-term employment, but like it worked out both ways because I didn't really want long-term employment in Batasman. It's too far of a drive, and I don't want to move, right? Yeah. So, but what did arise is like, you know, they gave me a reference letter, and my friend told me, he's like, you should ask like Dean's sister. Yeah. I'm gonna let you know, she doesn't give it out often, but I know she's gonna give one to you. You should ask her. And it didn't even occur to me, like, you know, again, like people are just looking out for me, right? Some of the teachers there, like, as soon as they found out, like, oh, like, you're getting this last minute social 30, okay, here's like 6 contacts, like, reach out to these people. One of them now, I don't know if she's principal or vice principal, so she might be principal. She's like, hey, my husband, he's at the comp, he's been doing this course for a while. Here's his email. I'll let him know you're going to contact him.
Really?
And it's like people just stepped in to help, right? Now, obviously, I want to do my own thing with my own material, but knowing that, like, all of a sudden it went from, like, I'm a teacher to, no, I'm in a community. Yeah. Like, we are a team, right? Like, people who have never seen me, who probably will never see me, were sending me all their material, telling me, like, hey, if you struggle with this, let me know, blah, blah, blah.
It's pretty cool.
And all of that comes from just taking that extra step, right? Taking that initiative and just saying, like, you know what? Okay, I just started my career. I can't expect the top salary. I can't expect the respect and the dignity that comes with, like, being someone who's well known.
Yes.
Whereas now, like, there's so many leniencies given to me. I feel.
but it comes after a lot of work too. You know what I mean?
it's like at the end of the day, you're like, I feel like the people at the office know there's never going to be a problem. I'm going to sort it out with whatever student. They might have to look the other way of like, oh, Najib's sorting it out in his way. But then what do the students go and tell those people?
Right.
Like, they're enjoying my classroom.
Right.
The relationship is being built and problems are being dealt with.
Yeah.
In a necessary manner with some people to deal with them. And I think that garners a lot of respect in the environment of, like, you know, particularly this one student that, like, wasn't being properly dealt with in the past.
Yeah.
But just being upfront and honest, like, hey, you're being annoying. Shut up.
Like, it's that sometimes simple. Needs to be said.
That's what everyone's thinking. That's what everyone above me is thinking. That's what your past teachers were thinking. Yeah. Like, now you just need to hear that.
Yeah.
Like, you're being annoying. Shut up.
Now what are you going to do?
Right?
Yeah.
And the message was taken, right? You know, like, and like, it got pretty bad. Like, by the end of the semester, I was just like, no filter. It's just like, okay, this is exactly what you're doing. You're just whining. You're crying. You're being a baby. And it's embarrassing. It's gross. Like, fix it up.
Well, right? And they got a choice, you know? Then they know and they can make a choice. What do they want to do?
Right? And I feel like we veered really off the question.
Yeah, but I mean, you know what? It's all related.
Because it still connects to that point of, like,
100%.
You know, get your knowledge and experience at the lowest entry level.
Yeah.
Right? And it's really cool to hear that you worked on these construction sites. Do you want to talk a bit more about that? Like, what was your, like, how long did you do that? What was your experience like?
So I was kind of fortunate because I only really had to work in the summers while I was in university.
Yeah.
And so I did, I can't remember, 2 or 3 summers kind of doing that, just doing the laboring. And it was great. I made friends with kind of all the trades and, like I say, got a lot of experience. And then through a family friend, that's when I ended up getting a summer job that just happened to open up at the government doing project management. And then that was kind of when I transitioned into kind of doing the project management thing. So yeah, it would just kind of, you know, I would have kept doing that laboring job too, but like same thing, opportunity kind of presented itself. And so.
Do you recall your interview for that job?
Yes.
Okay.
For sure.
The specific question I have for you is, having that experience of getting to know all the trades and how they function on the job site,
yes.
Did you feel that helped? Do you feel like that was an asset in your interview?
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
I do. Yeah. And I say it like so confidently because you could speak to, like, as a project manager, you know, a lot of the questions they're asking are, it's about your ability to work with and manage people and manage teams. And so, yeah, your ability to when you're project managing a construction project, you got to know what's happening. You know, you got to know what's actually happening on the ground. So, yeah, to be able to have seen it and been there, then you can speak to it. And maybe that's not directly what you're going to be doing, but it doesn't really matter because it comes across. I think it's pretty obvious that you've spent some time on a construction site, and I think that just comes through in how you kind of conduct yourself and how you are able to kind of answer those questions about what's your plan, you know?
And I would imagine being able to answer in a holistic way where like, okay, well, we got to make sure like this group of people is on top of this
Yes.
because that's like the foundation of the job, and like making sure that these people are aware of these things.
Exactly.
I feel like it demonstrates to the interviewer, oh, we have a project manager sitting in front of us applying for a project managerial position.
Yeah.
We should give this guy the job, right?
I think so.
Because it's not like, oh, this person's hoping to be one. No, this person's practiced being one
Yeah.
while they were maybe
parts of it.
sweeping, right?
Right.
Or while they were putting up drywall, whatever.
Yeah.
Like they were aware, right?
Sure, even though you don't necessarily know all the ins and outs of the role, yeah, if you've been thinking about it and kind of preparing yourself for it
Yeah.
through just being in that world, yeah, I don't think there's any substitute for just that kind of experience.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to skip over these next two questions.
Yeah,
I
that's
don't know
right.
unless you want to go
No,
over some of.
Yeah, we've kind of talked
cause,
about a lot of the challenges.
Because we'll finish with that wrap
Yeah.
up question, but so let's talk more about your career, like your time
Yeah.
in the engineering field. Like, what else would you want to share about that? Because I guess what was the biggest like difference from the classroom to the actual job site?
So I ended up doing, well, it's kind of funny because when I did my master's and then I got on with the government was more project management, which is more where, you know, like you're hired on by the owner, the government, to basically manage the architect and the engineer and help manage the contractor. And so, you know, to make sure that everything's working together. And so that was different than what I did in school. It's kind of you're in the same world, but it's pretty different.
Very
So-
different. Because you're managing several
Yeah.
people and yourself.
Yeah, and
right?
you're not-
just yourself. Right?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
it wasn't just like a design. You're not just designing these buildings as an engineer, which was not really what I thought I wanted to do.
Uh-huh.
But then I got in there and realized I really like being with people. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
the being around people, and I'm in meetings and I'm on the phone and I'm like making these connections, and that's what I loved. And then
Yeah.
I kind of sat back and said, like, I'm not actually sure I want to, because I was working with a lot of engineers and I get to see what they do every day. Finally, at that point, after 5 years, now I'm finally starting to see what these engineers are doing, and I see them at their desk designing, and they're in a lot of the meetings too, but I kind of realized, you know what, I don't think that's what I want to do. I don't actually want to design buildings. I want to be the one in sort of helping run the show and just like oversee things, you know what I mean? And helping
Yeah.
coordinate and meeting with people. So I kind of fell in love with the project management side of it, and so that's what I did. I finished my master's, but then I went back and got a full-time job with the government for 5 years managing projects and loved it.
Wow. So you were
Yeah.
26.
Yeah,
You-
so
when you started.
Ooh, that's good.
You had little to no experience in the field as an engineer,
Yeah, none.
but your contacts, your previous work that you put in,
Yeah,
working on those job sites, allowed you that opportunity to be a project to basically jump the whole hierarchy. Really,
yeah.
right?
It was really
in a way,
yes,
right?
No, it was because it was a contact that I made through laboring that ended up working at the government, and then they were the one that kind of brought me over.
Which,
so
you know, if you really break it down, like, you know, Firas Zahabi, who's like a martial arts guy and a philosopher,
Yeah.
he talks about this idea of the God calculator, right?
Yeah.
And it's like the God calculator can calculate all the variables and whatnot and tell you the result. If we really broke it down, it's like you didn't really skip anything. You kind of
Yeah.
leapfrogged yourself,
A little
right?
bit.
And that's very possible, right? Like you read a lot of the growth mindset related stuff and personal growth and whatnot, and there's like a very key piece of advice out there that say like, hey, go monk mode for a year,
Right.
focus on yourself, and it'll put you 5 years ahead of everyone around you.
right.
And I feel like that's
Yeah.
kind of what you were doing of like, okay, I'm going to work these summers on these job sites. And you have an inquisitive mind, so you're like, oh, I wonder what this guy does in the job. Like, how does your job fit into the job site? And it just sets you up that you're able to spring forward because you've already built this depth of it.
I think so.
Yeah.
I do think so. Yeah. I mean, I was fortunate the way it worked out for sure. A lot of things kind of went my way, but yeah.
But it's not as if you didn't put some effort into that, right?
Exactly. I think there's something there too.
So what was the biggest turnoff from what the engineers were doing? Because you basically initially thought you were going to go do that.
Yeah.
So
that's what I
when
went-
you got into project management, what was the most like kind of turn off, repulsive thing that they were
Do
doing?
you know what? I was never really. It's not really so much that I was kind of turned off. I guess it was just I realized it was not for me. It was a little bit too isolated.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? Because you're spending a lot of time naturally you're spending a lot of time doing computer modeling and that kind of stuff, and
Which is typically what engineers like.
which is
right?
what they like. It's a little bit more of an isolated role, whereas I guess I just thought I would really miss the personal connections and the spending my day. How do you want to spend your day?
Yeah.
And for me, it wasn't really, I didn't really want to spend it in front of a computer. I wanted to be on site because I kind of really enjoyed being on a construction site. And then I wanted to be meeting with people. And so I didn't really want to get stuck behind a desk for the majority of my time. And so just as a result of that, once I started seeing what the options really were, then I kind of decided, yeah, you know what, this is a little bit more for me. So
Do you think you could have gotten that job without the masters?
I do. I do, 100%.
How do you feel about that?
I don't actually mind it. I feel like it was all kind of part of this journey.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
I couldn't have gotten there if I hadn't. It all sort of, I was doing the laboring jobs because I needed a job while I was doing my master's, and then that was kind of the one that introduced me to project management. And so, in this roundabout way, I mean, I look back now after all these years and all the time and money spent in engineering, but I don't think I'd change it because it was all part of this.
Yeah. Well, it's the hero's journey. Right?
Yeah.
I'm pointing over exactly my poster there, right? But it's the hero's journey. It's like you read The Alchemist, right?
Yeah, love it.
Right?
Love it.
He comes back full circle.
Yes.
It's like, oh, the treasure was right under where I was living the whole time. Okay, yeah.
100%.
Interesting.
And so, I think it's all just kind of part of it. So I don't necessarily regret any of it. I didn't use it. I never really used any of my masters. But, and that's a lot of work. But at the same time, hey, I gained a lot of other skills and experiences there and met a lot of great people. And
you always had that strong foundation. Like,
Yeah.
no, I did my engineering and I did my master's. Like, I know what I'm talking about from an academic viewpoint. And I've also been on the field, the job site, and I know what I'm talking about holistically.
Yeah, I used it. And you kind of carry it forward with you. And it was just sort of part of, it's just kind of the way it went for me.
Yeah.
And that was okay.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. Do you want to speak more to why you think you could have gotten the job without the masters?
I know that
because that's very important for kids to understand that
when you're
hey, if you're actively working towards a goal, your mind will fixate on that and you'll see opportunities rather than roadblocks. Like maybe you'll see roadblocks as well, but you will slowly start to maneuver your way into a position where you can get that goal.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's a whole different way of going about it because you could be an 18-year-old saying, hey, I just want a little bit of money, right? I want a decent car, I want to be able to pay my own bills and take my girlfriend out, whatever.
Right.
Cool, I'll just go work this construction job. But if you're a bit smart and you're ambitious and you have humility of I need to learn, you could work your way up. So speak more about why you think that that's possible.
I guess just from my experience, when I actually got into that role and you kind of see where people were coming from. People came from, there were architects working there and people that had come from, some from engineering and some from actually a lot of different backgrounds. They were all kind of had found their way into this role one way or another. And I kind of realized there's so many different paths that can kind of bring you to the same point.
Yeah.
And so, again, for me, it was a lot of making connections and meeting the right people kind of along the way. But I don't know, I worked with a lot of my colleagues didn't have that kind of experience, but they came with different kind of experience that all kind of worked really well together. So I don't think, looking back, all that, my educational experience necessarily put me that much further ahead than it would have without it. I think I could have done a lot of the same things without all that experience, but I think it also lends itself in other ways.
But it's cool, right? When you get to that position, you're like, oh, this guy's background is so different. They've spent, and maybe it would have taken longer, right? Maybe you would have been 36, right?
Maybe.
Which at the same time, there's no issue with that.
No.
Right?
Yeah, and I learned a ton from the other people that had come from, a lot of people had done their, had become architects.
Yeah.
And then decided to get into project management. So you can learn a ton from that because I really like the architectural side of it. Yeah. So, everybody's got their specialty.
Yeah. Okay, so let's transition here. So, let's just be honest. When people hear the word or the phrase project management, they probably think a lot of money, right? Government job, money, right? Vacation, retirement, all the bells and whistles.
Yeah.
what inspired the change? Like, why go to teaching where you don't have a lot of control over
Yeah.
your assignment? You don't have
That's
a lot
true.
of control over who's in your classroom. You
Yeah,
don't
that's
even
true.
have a lot of control over like how the consequences are.
No.
Because like, you know, if you have a contractor who's not doing their job,
Yeah.
what happens?
Oh, lots of yeah. Well, you
Like,
know,
can you just be like, hey, this person's not doing their job. We need someone else.
yeah, a lot of times, sure. Like, I mean, you know, like, and that was what we did is you manage those contracts and you find different options. But they were switching people out when they weren't doing their job, and sometimes you did have to, you know, have
Right.
those, yeah, there's pretty natural consequences that come when those guys weren't up doing their job.
Right. And so around this time, you're probably like close to 30,
Yeah.
maybe 31.
Yeah.
Your wife has been teaching almost 10 years.
Yes.
So you know that when a kid isn't doing their job, you suck it up, right?
Yeah.
Like you figure out a way to deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Given all those factors, why did you want to switch?
Yeah.
Because it's not an easy transition.
No.
First, you have to go to university again
Yeah.
for 2 years, which is expensive.
Yeah. And it's
Right.
full time. You have to take it in the day. So I had to quit my job
Which
and live off your savings. I mean, my wife was working, fortunately, for part of it, but then, you know, she was on mat leave, so I was kind of working part time, and yeah, so you're kind of. It was a bit of a
you're going from the safety of
Yeah.
your kingdom that you've built after going on your hero's journey. You're now jumping either into the water or
yeah,
wandering through the desert.
pretty
It's
scary.
chaos.
Yeah, it's
right?
pretty scary.
It's like you have no idea what's going to happen next.
yeah, with a kid on the way.
With a
You
kid
don't
on
know-
the way,
you don't know what it's going to look like when you get out of university. There was a lot of talk that there's not going to be any jobs, and so yeah, that part was pretty nerve wracking. And God bless my wife. Like she was the one that actually kind of I would talk about it all the time, you know. And it wasn't that I was really unhappy in engineering. It's just that I would always talk about I just wasn't really feeling fulfilled
Yeah.
for me, and I spent a lot of my day sort of squabbling over money. You know, because ultimately, you know, I transitioned into the private sector where I worked for a group called WSP, like a big
We didn't
engineering
even talk
firm.
about
You know,
that.
there's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
huge kind of like international engineering and project management firm, and
Yeah.
they were a great group to work for. But ultimately, you know, I spent a lot of my day as a project manager kind of felt like fighting. You know, like kind of like a lawyer, you kind of feel like you're fighting a lot of your day, and it's
We
just
didn't
that
talk about that either.
no,
What does
yeah,
that look
for
like?
me,
Yeah.
well, for me it was, you know, I'm always calling architects and they need more money, and because the contractor didn't do their job, and so then there's a change, and then they want a little extra money for it, so you got to go and try and get more money, but they don't think, you know, and you're always just kind of in this state of
It was
kind of squabbling.
adversarial.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was very adversarial, and it just wasn't me. And a lot of people really thrive on that, and they can get in there, and you know, they just
Yeah.
love that. But for me, it's just not who I am. And so, I really ended up wanting. I just wasn't really feeling fulfilled. And then I'd always talk about because I always thought about maybe one day being a teacher, but it wasn't until maybe I just said it too many times to my wife, and she said, you know, maybe she'd really think about it. You know, because
Yeah.
it's never going to get easier.
Yeah.
I always thought maybe one day in my career I'd go back and teach, or maybe at NAIT or something. She said, you should think about it.
Yeah.
And so then the more I really thought about it, and I really thought about it,
Yeah.
you know, because it
How,
was,
how many years did you spend considering it then?
I bet a year or two,
Okay.
like at the end, like where I really started thinking, like,
So 1
What
to
would
2
that
years
look
of
like?
very dedicated focus of like, what would this look like?
yeah. And it
Okay.
kind of like built to the point where, okay, so if I really was, what would that look like? Could I do it part-time? And then you start Googling, and now it's getting kind of real. So then you start looking, okay, now I go to apply, but I missed the application, so it would actually be for next year. You know, I spent a year thinking about it, and then you missed the deadline, so now you got to apply for next year. But the way it all worked out,
Well, even that's like
The-
a test of like, how bad do you want this?
Sure.
Right? When you miss the deadline, you're like, oh, damn.
I got
Well,
to
how
wait a
bad do you
whole
want
year.
this?
Sure,
Right?
You still okay to try it when you're
Because
Probably
after
31,
degree, you
I think.
can't start halfway through. You
No.
have to start in September.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. You
Okay.
gotta, at least at the U of A, because I couldn't move, it was, you gotta do it full time. It's pretty much during the days, so you can't really be working. I did work kind of part time, but yeah, you gotta kind of decide how much you want it. And truthfully, you know what? Prior, I mean, it was pretty scary kind of making that leap. But looking back, it's so funny because once you're in it, once you make that jump and you
Yeah.
apply and now it's happening, it's funny how I really believe the world kind of works its way to help
Absolutely.
make those things work.
Absolutely.
Do you know
That's the
what I mean?
hero's journey. That's,
Yeah.
that's the whole thing, right? The magical assistance. Right?
Yes.
That's like in movies, you know, you'll see like Harry Potter, right?
Yeah.
Family says no. They're like, screw it.
Right.
Like these birds won't stop coming to our house, these owls. We'll just go to an island.
Right.
And then Hagrid shows up, kicks the door down. What do you do now? It's right in front of you, right?
Exactly.
You know?
You can't escape it. And yeah, that was kind of my experience. Is, you know what? And then I had to go to my boss and say, you know what, I'm quitting. I got to go do something totally different. And he said, well, do you want to stay on kind of part time? Like, would you have the capacity to stay on part time? Like, sure, that'd be ideal because then I could still, make some money. So
bills,
I thought they were going to be really disappointed, but they were super supportive. And like wanting to just kind of make it work. They knew that's what I wanted, and they respected me, and I respected them, and they did everything they could to help me make it work. It was awesome.
Well, I'm curious. Why do you think how do you think that relationship was built? Because I'm assuming for many people, especially young kids, when they're working minimum wage jobs, you have a lot of adversarial relationships with your boss, and maybe teachers can feel the same way of like, because there's a whole lot of loyalty involved in the profession. It's like, you're leaving us, right? Like,
yes,
I know, but I got to explore my options, right?
Yes.
I got to explore what really interests me, which is tricky. What was it with your relationship with your boss at the time, or that field in general, that do you think allowed that to be like, hey, like, let's meet in the middle. We'll help you out, David. We'll take care of you, and then we'll let you on your way.
Yeah, when I transitioned into the private, I started out with a very small private group.
Yeah.
There was only like a handful of us, and we were like working on really trying to like kind of build a brand in this company, and then got bought out by kind of this larger group. But we were in the trenches together, for kind of a while.
Yeah.
Where you're really working out, trying to get jobs. You're grinding, trying to like kind of make it work. And so I don't know, you just been through a lot together, and everybody's kind of just supporting each other. And then when I told them I wanted to make that switch, it might have been a little different. I don't know if you'd have wanted to go to some competitor, but I think just given that they could see that this was just something I needed to go do. And so I think they just wanted to help me with that.
How many people were there exactly? Like 8, 10?
In the company?
Like you're saying this small group of you in the trenches, how many?
So there was like 3 of us in the
office
when we started. 3 or 4 of us when we started.
Okay.
It was really small. Like there was a Calgary group, but and one in Toronto that was a little bit bigger, but like we were small. We were just kind of getting going.
So you're probably spending a lot of time having lunch together, hanging out
together.
Oh yeah,
we were in this little office. We were in this teeny little office downtown.
Are you still friends with these people?
Do you know what? Yeah, I try and kind of reach out to them when I can. It's not as much as I'd like. Not as much as I'd like, but yeah, they're just such good people. Such good people, honestly.
Okay, so it's like they probably knew you very well.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh, David, like, thank God, finally.
Yeah.
We know, we know you'd be better suited to this.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I was sad to leave.
Feel?
I think they kind of knew when I explained, what, this is always something I thought about doing, and now, I gotta do it. Yeah. Makes sense. You know what? And
maybe they felt the same way when they started this company.
Process, and that's
or like
it.
the 3 of you, right?
Yeah, and everybody's kind of follow their passion, and so I just kind of try and do the same, and just good people. Like you say, I think people want to kind of try and support you for a lot of people.
Well, I think like this is more of a street saying, but it's like, real recognizes real, right?
Yeah.
So it's like if they're on that hustle and grind of like, this is my dream, what I want to do, and you come up and you say, hey, listen, like, I know it's not the most financially lucrative. I know it's maybe not the most prestigious thing to do, and it's not the most high status, but like, God, I've always dreamt of like, teaching.
Yeah.
Right?
How do you argue with that? And they kind of said, it sounds like you really thought it through,
Yeah,
How can we help support you? Like, that's like great that you kind of
and I don't know if you see the movie Don't Mess with Zilhan.
Yeah.
It's not like a half-baked idea of like, oh, I want to be a barber. I want to cut hair.
No.
Right? It's like, and even if it was, if it's like, God, I've been cutting my friends' hair, my own hair, and it's like, I love being able to transform people, and they see the passion. It's like, cool, start your own business, right? So I guess they had that whole like, okay, is David like feeling a little bummed out about the way the company's going?
Yeah.
Like, what's going on? Oh no, he's very passionate.
They knew, and I told them straight up. I said, you know what, it's really hard to leave. It was really hard to leave that group because we'd been through a lot together, kind of in those years. And so I said, it is really hard to leave because there's nothing that I dislike about the group and the people. There are parts of the job I didn't love, like I said, but it wasn't about that. It was more about I needed to go do this other thing. And it didn't. I was definitely making more money. Making quite a bit more money, but I never even think about that, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
I was listening to a podcast the other day about, I can't remember what it was called, but it was all about happiness in this study. This Yale professor did this happiness study, and they were talking about how, overall kind of level of happiness increases with your salary, as they did this study, but only up to sort of a certain point.
Yeah.
And you hit this point where you hit, around, I think it was around $70,000 they said, or 75,
grand,
yeah, somewhere
right?
in there, where, you know what, like once all your basic needs are met, then, you know what, your happiness isn't really increasing with your salary so much anymore. And
right, it's more about the internals.
Yeah.
Like,
and
you could be miserable in a Ferrari.
Yeah,
if you
absolutely.
have things to be miserable.
yeah, because you worry about every rock chip that's heading your way. You know what I mean? It comes with these other things, and I don't know.
Well, I just mean on the interpersonal front. It's like, okay, if your relationship with your family's not good,
Yes,
like, and you
absolutely.
feel miserable, it's like maybe you don't make the connection.
Yeah.
And you think like, oh, the Ferrari's going to
It's
solve
going to
that.
do that.
But it's
yeah.
like, no,
and
no,
it comes
no,
with
right?
exactly.
Now,
it
if
comes
you're
with all
like-
these other problems,
If you're pretty happy and content, and then you get a Ferrari, it's
Yeah.
like, oh,
Great.
sweet, right?
Yeah.
Like,
you really enjoy
Right.
it.
Yeah,
And I was just really fortunate that for me, I had kind of enough to be able to make meet your needs.
Yeah.
And I don't really ever think about the
Okay.
money or the lost money.
yeah.
I really don't. Yeah.
Which is like so interesting for people to consider, because even for myself, like, I know I'm dealing with my own issues with my money relationship, just growing up as an immigrant and like that
Yes.
whole background. But it's also one of those things I consider. It's like how do I feel as a teacher putting in this effort, being compensated in this way,
Yeah.
right? This much,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, that's a whole different conversation.
It is, and
right?
it's so different because when I came from the private side, and you're like, the harder you work, the more money you make.
Absolutely.
Do you know what I
right?
mean?
Absolutely.
Like you're
right?
grinding, but you're going and getting jobs, and then you get compensated for that.
And like, if you
And-
know what you're worth and what you
Right.
bring to the company, like maybe you bring in like 5-10 million revenue a year.
Yeah.
That's $250K a year. That's
right,
what I'm worth.
That's what you're
right?
worth. You're worth what you're
And
worth.
if you pay me that, here's how I'm going to go from 10 million to 30 million
Yeah.
next year, right?
right.
And maybe you keep that plan on the side before, right? It's like, I have a plan, right?
Yeah.
But
And
like, there's no negotiating that in teaching. It's
No.
like, now it's kind of nice because I did have a discussion with a friend about this, and I was saying like, okay, like, because I want to ask you actually, I'll ask you first, what was your agreeableness level at? Sorry, I mumbled the hell out of that. Your
no, my agreeableness. Yeah,
right?
yeah. When I did the
Because you were mentioning that you're not very, like, you didn't really like the conflict side of like always fighting with people. right?
when I did that
Yeah.
survey that you said, it was one of my absolute highest. I was in like the
right?
98% agreeableness.
So from a temperamental standpoint, it's like you're not someone who's inclined to want to fight.
No.
Right? And particularly,
No.
it's like, let's be honest, what would have been over just bullshit, right? Like, it's
Yes.
like,
No,
dude,
it
just
felt
do
like
your
it.
job. Like,
That's
we're
what I
paying
felt
you
like.
fairly.
Come on.
Right? Like, do
Yes.
your job.
Yes.
Whereas, like, it might be like a more personal, deeply like, hey, no, like what you've done is wrong. Like,
Yeah.
maybe you feel very differently about that.
Yes.
And it's good that you had that experience of like having to fight over people about
Yeah.
nonsense, because like
Yeah.
half the battles in the classroom are over nonsense. It's
It
like, dude,
is.
just do your job.
And
Like,
yeah,
just sit there.
Yes.
Like, we're all suffering,
let's
right? You know,
let's
like
level.
just
And I had that conversation all the time, and I learned a ton from it because it kind of puts you in that position that maybe you're not super comfortable in. So, and then you got to have those conversations about,
Right.
hey, you know what, this is just not reasonable. Like what you're asking
Yeah.
is just not reasonable, and here's why. But you know what, like. I never got into any real like conflicts or anything like that, even though you have to have those tough conversations because yeah, I am pretty agreeable, and so you just want to try and find something that's fair for everybody. So
well, then knowing your stuff is like, here, listen, this is the reality.
Yeah.
Like, there's,
Right.
I'm not being mean. Like, this
Right.
is just reality. Like, this is the
Exactly.
job we've asked you for. This is the material cost. This is the time it should take.
Right.
This is the money
Right.
compensation.
Yeah.
Where's the issue?
exactly.
And you, like, we know what we're doing.
Yeah.
Why aren't you doing your job?
Yeah.
Right? That's not really a
No.
conflict, because it's more like, I've already beat you in this war. Like, I
Yeah.
put you in checkmate, right?
Yeah,
But what I was saying to my friend about the teaching profession, it's like, yeah, sure, you know, it kind of feeds onto that agreeableness of like, you know, if you're not, because negotiating for salary is basically disagreeing with someone on what your worth is, right? I tell this to students all the time. It's like, you know, like, sure, maybe I think I'm worth 90K a year right now, right?
Yep.
But am I actually producing 90K a year results? Sure, maybe in some aspects,
Yeah.
maybe not in others, right?
Yep.
But regardless, like, maybe by the time I'm like 5-6 years into my career, it's like, hey, no, like based on what I do here and here and here,
Yes.
like, no, it's like 120K a year.
yeah,
That's just not going to happen in this field, right?
Yeah.
And like, you know, it's like, how does the pay go up per year? It's what, well, I calculated it for this district. It's about $3,000 a year.
Yeah.
And I think it's about $3,000 lateral as well, right? So it's like
Yeah.
$9,000 difference if you take the extra years of university. For me, it's just not worth it at this
Yeah.
point. But
Right.
you know, it's interesting because it makes me wonder for myself. It's like, okay, like, Najib, is this really what you want to be doing if
Right.
you have such a quarrel with how much you're being paid for it? or do you just need to fix your own relationship with your money and whatever? Like growing up, like
So
poverty mindset.
So what do you
right?
think?
Oh, it's so tricky.
That's interesting.
It's so because I know I have to deal with my own poverty mindset of feeling
Yeah.
like there's not enough money.
Yeah.
Now, part of it is also like I am doing smart financial things on the side. I'm
Yeah.
making sure I'm saving money. Part of it is just my wants. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, I'd like a really nice car, right?
Sure.
Like it doesn't have to be brand new, but it's like, man, I love driving fast.
Yeah.
I was just getting chewed out by the bus driver this morning,
Oh.
and I take full responsibility. I'm not gonna say how fast I was going on camera,
Yeah,
but I
no,
was
that's fine.
speeding. I was
Yeah.
speeding. But this bus driver, she was on my ass, man. Like she was part of this equation as well. Anyways,
Yes.
God, I like having a nice fast car,
Yeah.
like a 2-door coupe.
Sure.
I like, clearly I like nice things,
Yeah.
right? And one of those things is okay. So like these boots, for example, are very pricey. But
Nice.
I did a lot of research on them. I know that they should last me in this profession about
Right.
10 years,
Yeah.
right? And I take care of them.
Right.
So
So
it's like, cool. So I spend a bit of money, and like part of it is like just like, okay, Najib, you're building yourself up, and
Yeah.
it's going to cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
But you're not going to build yourself up every 3 years,
Right.
unless you're like a moron and you're constantly dropping things.
Which is
right?
easy to do
is
too, yeah,
Easy
which
to
is
do,
easy to
right?
do.
Easy to do.
Sure.
So part of it is just dealing with like the poverty mentality that I kind of grew up
Yeah.
with, right? Like, and I've journaled about that, like. Because growing up, I always felt like we were poor, like we didn't have
Right.
enough. Because it was always like, no, we don't have enough for sports, we don't have enough for this, we don't have enough for that.
Mm.
And then slowly realized, like, hey, wait a minute, like my parents are about to retire. They have 2 houses. Like one is
Right.
almost paid off, and the other will be paid off within the next 10 years. My parents are freaking loaded in that regard.
Right.
It's like, what do you mean, mom and dad? You've been lying to me
Couldn't
this
afford
whole
soccer,
time,
yeah.
right? Yeah, right. And like,
But
I'm not
still.
saying that they didn't struggle,
Yes.
right? Because like feeding 4 kids and a
Yeah,
wife is hard
that's a
on one
lot.
income, right?
Yeah.
So just dealing with my own hang-ups around money and whatnot, and just recognizing like, okay, I am being paid very well.
Yeah.
Like I can
Yes.
survive, I can thrive,
Yeah.
right?
And you
No,
compare
I
it to other provinces or other,
For this profession,
around
for
this
sure,
profession,
for
or
sure.
other countries. You look at the states, and yeah,
But I will be honest. If I found something that I really felt like I liked doing, because
Yeah.
I love teaching. Like I
Yeah.
love being in a classroom. It's so much fun.
yeah,
Like people think when I say, maybe there's some validity to this, right? I won't deny that. Kids will tease me, Quadri, you're never working. It's like, no, I'm
Right.
never working, right?
Yeah.
Like this doesn't feel like work.
Isn't
Like,
that,
you wanna
isn't
know what's-
that, isn't that the dream though? Isn't that what you want?
It's like, you want to know what's work? Raking freaking asphalt
Yeah.
while it's 30 degrees,
Yeah.
having to pour hot tar.
Yeah.
That's work.
That's work.
Okay, like this is fun. I get to hang
Oh, I
out
know.
with kids, right?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I don't work at all. Like this ain't work. This is fun. And then, like
You know.
my mentality, my philosophy is like, well, I should be working at work.
Yeah.
My work is done outside, like
Yeah.
growing myself, developing myself, building my material.
Yeah.
I don't
Getting
do
ready.
that while I'm teaching. I
No.
can't like build a PowerPoint while I'm teaching.
No, exactly.
I
You
can't-
don't see that. Nobody sees that. Part
Yeah,
of it,
yeah. It's
you
like
know?
one of those you give the kids a little like, hey, shut the hell up, right?
Yeah.
You don't know when I'm actually working.
Yes.
Like, I tell kids, like, to you, this is magic. You show up, there's a notes package, there's a presentation,
Yes.
there's something to do, there's
It's true.
there's like me answering questions if
Yes.
you have some.
And you have answers to the
Yeah,
questions.
yeah. Like, and it may not be very specific, but it's like, man, broadly speaking, I can
Yeah.
answer just about anything that gets asked to me.
Right.
Right? It's like, you want to know
That
how that
doesn't
happens,
just
kids?
happen,
You want to
yeah.
know how that happens, kids? It's because I spend tens of hours every
I was
week
gonna say.
listening to podcasts, reading a
Yes.
book, devouring material I find interesting, right?
Getting prepared.
And like the thing is, it doesn't feel like work. I
Yeah.
enjoy it.
If
right?
that's what you like. I feel the same way, honestly.
So it's tricky. So it's like if I found something like this, because I've thought about like, okay, could I do forward movement? Like I thought about administration,
Yeah.
like totally being a vice principal. I even consider up to the level of superintendent. Like,
Yeah.
like if I really push for that, I think I could.
I think
do
you'd
that.
be good at it.
Yeah.
I do. No, honestly, yeah, you'd be great in an admin or a superintendent position.
I appreciate that you say that.
Yeah.
Like I've had several people comment, like different areas of my life, like, "Oh, Najib, you'd be great at this."
Yeah.
And like one of my goals for 2023 is read 5 books on leadership, and like now I'm starting that journey as well,
Yeah.
right? And I asked 2 students from last year to come and help coaching, so I'm kind of slowly building that up as well. But like it's tricky because part of me wants enough money to always feel comfortable because I
Right.
never felt comfortable financially growing up,
Right.
right? And it's like, Bob Marley has this saying, it's like if your happiness is in numbers, like you'll never be happy because those numbers
Yeah.
are endless, right?
Yeah, it's true.
Right? And so kind of working with myself of like, okay, what amount of money do I have to have sitting under my bed as a safety net
Yeah.
to feel comfortable, right?
Yeah.
and then how much of my savings and blah 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 blah. And it's like, again, coming back, and even in this conversation, realizing coming back to the idea, like I'm still building myself, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm not even 27 yet, right? Like I turned 27 in June,
Yeah.
and it's like, where should I be right now? I don't know, right? I could compare myself to other people, and sure, like some people around my age bracket, like, you know, I have a friend who's like living with his girlfriend, they have a house together.
Yeah.
You know, I know people who are younger than me who bought a house. Like, cool.
Yeah.
I'm not really interested in owning a house right
Right.
now.
It doesn't make sense if it doesn't make sense.
Blah blah blah. You know, people are going on trips, they're doing this, they're doing
Yeah.
that, but it's like, hey, like at an overall level, I think I'm doing very well amongst my friends in terms of, or just people my age in terms of like maturity, how I put myself
Yeah.
together. So it's like it's a tricky conversation, but I do tell myself that I'll probably teach for 10 years
Yeah.
before I really consider like moving either up
Yeah.
or away,
Yeah.
right? So that's a tricky one, but yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's like, would I do this for free? Probably not, because I
Yeah.
need to pay my bills. But
Yes.
am I happy doing it for how much it's costing me right now?
I feel
Like-
the same way.
Like, it's not like, sure, in my most cynical moments, I'm like, oh my god, like that's
Good
it.
enough. Yeah.
Like, that's it. Come on, that's gonna be gone in like the next 30 seconds. I gotta pay this bill. I gotta pay that.
know.
I gotta do this and
I
that.
know.
And I gotta wait another month before I take the next step, right?
Yeah.
But like coming back to those like habits, like I'm trying to really systematize my savings. So
Yeah,
it's like, okay,
smart.
as soon as like the money comes in, this much goes away,
To save is smart.
right? I'm trying to address like I'm trying to have less credit cards and like
Yeah.
really pulling back on that this year, and trying to just use cash or debit. You know, because it comes down to it's like, well, where's my money going? Well, you
Yeah.
have this credit card that has a $5,000 limit.
Yeah.
Half of that's $2,500. That's a big chunk of your paycheck.
Yeah.
Okay, stop using that. Use the one that's a $2,000 limit. Half of
Right.
that's $1,000. That's very easy to pay off.
Right.
That's very
You might
easy
be
to
thinking
monitor,
about it
right?
a little more. Yeah, exactly. If it
Totally,
makes you
right?
think about it.
Totally, right? So it's like, okay, there's still so much room for improvement on the financial end for me of my
Yeah.
own habits of behavior
Yeah.
that, like, you know, and I don't have the book here. I recently bought a book recommended by a friend called Millionaire Teacher.
Oh, I love it.
Okay.
I was just gonna say.
Oh, okay,
it's-
okay.
yeah,
I'm
one of my
glad
favorites.
you-
Yeah, it's
I'm
one of
glad-
my
okay.
favorites.
You know, and so, like, and there's another guy, like, he wrote Bachelor Pad Economics, Darren
Yes,
Clary.
great too.
Oh,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know that as well?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I actually...
I've read a lot of finance
Okay.
about that. Yeah.
You know, it's like there's certain ideas in there that's like, oh, like, cool. Like, I could buy a crappy car. Like, do you know Chris Fix on YouTube?
No.
Oh, his material would be great to binge. He's
Is it?
he's like an at-home mechanic. Like, he taught himself.
Oh,
But
I'm guessing. I do a lot of mechanic stuff. I'm guessing I've probably seen.
Okay,
some of
yeah,
them,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I've
He's got
recognized
a great repertoire of information. So
Okay.
there's one, like, I think I mentioned I'm not vaccinated. And so when people couldn't leave the house who weren't vaccinated, I binged everything I could find, right? Like, I went through like 25 hours of Thomas Sowell's material.
it. Yeah.
15, 20 hours of this other guy, I always forget his name.
That's
Both
awesome.
economists, right?
Yes.
Talking about history and whatnot and how that boils down, plays a role with racism, politics, right? Helps me so much in my classroom.
Wow, I bet.
I spent maybe 15 hours just going through Chris Fix's materials. Like, how do you do all these basic small changes? You slowly
Right.
realize, like, oh, it's actually not that hard. Like,
No.
you might have to
That's it.
spend $1,000 to $2,000 on tools and like
Yeah.
small setup stuff because the stuff is expensive.
Yeah.
But once you have that, it's like, oh, like this is like a 2-day job
Yeah.
for like a lowly person like myself
Yeah.
who doesn't know how to do it.
Yeah.
That's a weekend, right?
Yeah.
You know.
A lot of that stuff is never as hard as you build it out
Um,
to be.
And so what I do love about this profession is like it gives me so many opportunities to better myself.
Yeah.
That like, hey, if one day I decide to really pursue financial compensation,
Yeah.
I will have 15 skills at a
Right.
very high level.
Yeah.
That just makes me a solid human being. And I was slowly realizing as I've been having this financial discussion with several people, and
Yeah.
like, you know, it boiled down to the other day I was talking about a roommate and his mom. It's like, well, did you like, why are you a teacher then? It's like, why are you here? If you really have an issue with the money, why are you doing it?
Yeah. And what's the
And
answer?
I thought about it. I was like, you know what? It's helping me to learn how to be a better father. 'Cause I
Yeah.
really hope to have a family one day.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's the one thing I always come back to. It's like,
Interesting.
it's teaching me skills of how to be a better father, how to be a better man, how to be a better leader. And It's
Right.
like, I get paid to learn how to do that.
Yeah. Isn't that something?
Yeah.
I know.
Right? And like, honestly, that's like the mindset I think to have. It's like, I'm getting paid to learn how to do this thing.
Yeah.
Right? Is it work? It can be.
Sure.
Right? Like, building roads, like working on the road crews for the first like 3 weeks was fun.
Yeah.
Super fun. It's like, oh, what? Like that's how this is filled. That's what
Yes.
they're doing. Like learning what does that pour do? What does this company do? How does that work? How, like, oh, so this is asphalt. Well, who does the cement? Oh, they do the cement. That's how they build the cement. That's
Yeah.
how they lay bricks. That's how they do the bridge. That's how they fix this.
Exactly.
But you know, if you're like, again, if you're someone who's like quite intelligent, very aware, asking questions, in a place like that, 3 to 6 weeks, you've already learned most what there is to learn in that position. Then it became work.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I gotta
But then
rake for the 1,000th time, right?
Yeah, but then there's probably other opportunities where you go and learn the next level of stuff.
Totally, right?
You know what I mean? And then you are getting paid to learn. And then you can apply that.
You know,
and
absolutely. Like, I could have gone into bridges, potentially.
Sure.
Like, again, if teaching didn't work out, because it wasn't working out at first, right? It took me 6 months to get my first sub job.
Really?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
just couldn't get any...
Yeah, I was
Couldn't get any work.
I was working for Elk Island Public Schools. I was on their sub
Oh,
list.
really?
And I didn't know what to do. They don't teach you in university how to get your name out there.
No. And that's one of the biggest things I know. I think that's
Right?
a huge missed opportunity.
So 6 months go by. I haven't worked anything. That's when I
Oh,
finally
wow.
decided to apply here, because my friend had told me in the summer, or like early at the start of the year, saying, "Najib, you should apply. Start Catholic." I was like, "Oh, Catholic, I don't know. I'm Muslim.
Yeah.
You know, I got some tattoos. Like, I don't really know. I've
Yeah.
heard horror stories. You know, 6 months goes by. It's like, man, forget all those horror stories. Like, I need money. I need a
Yeah.
job. Like, I need work.
Sure.
Right? So, you know, it comes
gotta
down
do
to
it.
like, and I'm very open with my students about this, and like, I'm trying very hard, very rapidly to solve as many problems as I can in my classroom.
Yeah.
That in 10 years, I might start getting bored.
Right.
It's like, okay, like I have maybe 2 to 3 years of every course that I'm teaching recorded,
Yeah.
right? Because I'm that one took me the longest. It's taken me about 2 years to get comfortable with putting the camera in the classroom. But
Yeah.
now it's like, I don't give a damn.
Right.
Who's gonna stop me? Like, there's no oversight.
No.
No one's watching.
And there's
Shit.
tons of benefit that comes from it,
So much
like for the
benefit.
students and for everybody. So,
So much, right?
yeah.
Because my biggest issue is I played it off as like, oh, I'm worried about like what?
Yeah.
What if a kid blah blah
Sure.
blah blah blah. But the deep down, it's like, I'm uncomfortable with it.
Right.
I'm not ready yet. But now I'm ready. It's like, okay, like I want this material out there. I want this recorded. I want this saved somewhere. So
Right.
like, because it might come down to a point where I just play the video and like do my own thing at the desk, right? And it's like, well, how can you say I'm not teaching? I'm literally teaching right
Doing
there,
the thing.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I
But I don't
love
think
the
somebody like you ever would. And that's the thing. You think you'd be bored in 10 years because you're not going to want to reinvent yourself with all the things you're learning. Like, as you better yourself and you're reading that other material and you're learning about,
That's the
making yourself
thing.
better, you think you'll ever stop? I'm not sure. I mean, I might find certain things that work really well that I keep, but I'm not sure it would ever just like...
Because for me, it might get to a point where it's like, I don't know if I should say this on camera. I'm not even like teaching curriculum. Like, it might be like 2 days of curriculum, 3 days of extracurricular. Like, hey kids, like here's some finance stuff.
Yeah.
Here's some like life planning stuff.
I had that conversation
some,
with
like-
some kids the other day.
You know, it's like,
Yeah.
because like, and I was looking through the grade 10 curriculum, and it's like, there's so much stuff in there. It's just like, what are we talking about? Like,
Yeah.
what is this? This is so ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know, and
Whereas
it's like,
those finance pieces that...
Yeah.
That's so huge.
right? Like if I
For
took
what's gonna really
if I
say,
took Millionaire Teacher and Bachelor of Pad Economics and
Yes.
made like a PowerPoint on finances,
Yes.
threw in a little bit of Robert Kiyosaki's Rich
Yes.
Dad Poor
Yes.
Dad. Have you ever played his game?
No,
He
I've read his book. but I've
he,
never
he,
played his
he
book.
has a game, Cash Flow 101.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
No.
like your kids are too young for it, but when they're like 6 to 9 years old, I think they'll understand the basics
Yeah.
of it. But that's like a game that teaches you how to like get out of the rat race.
Oh, that's a good
right?
one.
Like,
Oh, you should talk to me. That PowerPoint's the one I want to build for students. That like finance, bringing those.
Well, I
materials
feel like
together is-
you're way ahead of me on that journey. Like you
No,
should
I don't
just
know
put
about
together
that, but
some
it's just
tips.
lots of like it's only this year that I start having that conversation with students about we kind of just got on the topic of finance. I don't know how, and then there's such an interest there because it's not really talked about. And where do you learn that?
Nowhere.
And
Nowhere.
if your parents aren't necessarily doing it or don't necessarily are knowledgeable about it, or maybe they just don't talk about finances. Maybe they're doing it, but they're not talking about it. Yeah, like where do you get that? Learn about what your options are.
You know, and they're growing up in a time where like reading is not cool, it's not
Yeah.
interesting, and it's not practice.
Yeah.
You know, and like how do you get most of this information? Like a lot of it is you got to read.
Yeah.
You got to slowly sift through material. Sure, there's a bunch of great stuff out on YouTube,
Yeah.
right? But the YouTube can really like go into the wishy-washy abstract, like, oh, you should do this, you should do that. And it's like, I think books contain a lot of the fundamental basic stuff that once you've mastered that, you can move on to like other things.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, get a library card.
Right?
I'm serious.
No, absolutely. Like I actually sent an email home to all the grade 9s. Like you should get a library card.
Yes, everybody should have a library card. It's such a crazy resource.
But that's the thing. I do think like, okay, so like I may not have problems to solve, but it might still be like, how do I bring more value into my classroom? How do I give more value to my students while they're with me? Because they're stuck here, right? Like they're here for 85 minutes a day. I'm here for 85 minutes a day. How do I make this interesting?
Yeah.
Right? How do I make it enjoyable? Like, and that's the thing. Now that I'm thinking about that, my mindset's gone back to it. It's like, okay, so like at the 5 to 8 year mark, I might challenge myself and say, how do I teach nothing this year and have kids learn it all on their own? How do I set up projects, presentations, and automate this class? And it might be like, okay, I taught this group in grade 10, 11, grade 12, boom. Right? But the grade 12 social 30 is like, it should probably be taught.
Sure.
I think grade 11 could absolutely be taught by students.
Yeah.
Start to finish, right? Maybe 1 or 2 basic chapters, introduce what is nationalism.
Yeah.
French Revolution, absolutely break that down to parts, taught by students. World War I, World War II, interwar period, rise of Nazis, genocides, right? International organizations. Every single thing, I think that could be self-automated, taught by students.
It's interesting.
And
wouldn't that be wild?
How would that, like, how good of a job would that do preparing them for real life?
Yeah, I was gonna say, how much would that like impact their own learning, if they were the ones doing that little, again, it's kind of more guided. I mean, there's lots of philosophies that kind of push that, but
because like, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love hearing the sound of my own voice. But it might just come down to one day of like, okay, I'm just tired of teaching this. Like, you teach it to yourself.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Go learn how to do this on Google. By that time, ChatGPT will have taken over the world, right? Like, whatever.
Essays,
like,
they won't have to write essays anymore. So,
right?
What skills do you want them to have?
Yeah,
out of there?
Should totally still have writing, right? Like, they'll have to
absolutely.
do that. But, related to that money conversation, it's like it always falls back on, like, what am I gaining from this job that isn't money? Right, and I think that's a very important question to ask at any age in your life, but particularly when you're young, right? And that's not really what's taught to people, right? Because like even so, my influence like before kind of or going into teaching was more one of like, oh, Najib, don't go into teaching. Like, there's no money there,
right?
And I would smile and nod at these people, like, okay, thank you, knowing that it's like, okay, well, like I'm not just doing it for the money, right? Like. I don't want to do XYZ job that you're recommending because it sounds lame. It sounds boring.
Yeah.
And it just comes back down to, and I'm very grateful for this mindset, this mentality of like, what do I actually learn? Because like, I could build my YouTube channel over the next 10 years, and who knows what that becomes. Because kids have asked me like, oh, Kawaji, do you want to be a YouTuber? I'm like, not really. Like, maybe. But like, if I build it up to something where I could like email an author and be like, hey, can we talk about your book?
Right.
I want to put this on my channel. Like, that would be cool.
That is cool, yeah.
So as I'm doing this, I have all these opportunities to build in video editing skills, recording skills, presenting skills, right? And then you slowly see, oh, my laptop's going to die here soon. I didn't bring my charger. That was a mistake.
But those are such transferable skills that you'll carry forward.
Yeah. Okay, so my laptop's going to die. So we'll just, I feel like we've covered so many things.
Yeah, we really covered the gamut.
Real quick, what do you hope to achieve in your teaching career in the next 5 years?
You know what? I would have said kind of similar to you. I've thought a lot about like admin. People have kind of said the same thing, like, hey, maybe you'd be good in an admin position or something. Yeah. And I've thought about it. Now, being in this teaching where I'm teaching, I just love it so much. I can't imagine like giving that up. Yeah, like I want to be in the classroom with the kids. And I feel like, you know what? I could spend at least 10 years, 5-10 years, like you say, before I'd even really think about it.
Just because content.
Yes, because I feel like there's just so much. I just love it in the classroom. I feel like there's so much to be learned again that you could carry forward into an admin position maybe one day.
Yeah.
But for right now, I don't know. I just love it. I live in the classroom too much that.
So still build your expertise.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and like you say, bettering myself and mastering. Getting digitizing stuff and getting stuff online and trying to find new ways to connect and make it more interesting and. I don't know, there's just so many avenues I want to kind of tackle that it's going to take me a while. Yeah. But that's okay, that's part of it.
Okay. What any closing message to anyone considering engineering,
Honestly,
which is like
yeah.
such a small portion of what we discussed?
But you know what we did talk about like a lot of it. It's been such a good career for me. Like I really did enjoy it. And it's the right path. There's so many paths it can take you, and so many people have benefited from it. I would maybe just say, think about your options, and kind of like we said, go get your foot in the door somewhere. Start at the bottom rung on the ladder. If you want to do civil, go maybe get a job as a laborer. You want to get into mechanical engineering, go stop by a shop and go ask around, do a few emails, and realize that some of those people higher up are busy, but that there's also a lot of people that are willing to help. And so, look at some of your options. Do some research, because it's hard when you're in grade 12 and you're busy and you got exams. I get it. It's hard to make the time to think about your options. But I would really encourage students to do some research.
Yeah.
Think about what else is out there. Really think. Spend some time, because you're going to spend time.
Well, do more than think. Put your foot.
And then
get your foot in the door. Right?
Yeah, go research what's out there. Go make some phone calls. Go show up. Go show up at an engineering firm, and just see who you meet, because you'd be surprised. It's hard. Putting yourself out there, but you're going to spend 3 hours practicing writing an essay. Put that time into something that is really going to benefit you, because you're about to spend 4 years, potentially a whole career's worth, going down this road. That's worth some time. Really just thinking about it. So, not that engineering is not a great career, and it could definitely be the right one for a lot of students, but just thinking about it. Spend some time thinking.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, it was my pleasure.
This was very fun.
Yeah, it was great.
Okay, let's stop that.